Hey guys, and welcome to the first episode of my series within a series, Worth It Whiskey. Now, obviously this series is inspired by the ever-popular BuzzFeed series that I binge watch all the time. So what I'm going to do each episode is take 3 different whiskeys at 3 different price points and see if the price really makes a difference in quality. And if you've watched the past 2 episodes of my whiskey reviews, you know I love bourbon, so obviously we're kicking it off with bourbon whiskey. This one was a little harder to do because there are so many bourbons and I actually already have a lot in my collection, but I got these because they're readily available to everyone and I like them all. That's one thing I want to say starting off, no whiskey is a bad whiskey as long as you like it. I kind of stole that mantra from the Whiskey Tribe, which is another YouTube channel, you should check them out. But I'm not here to diss on what you like, what you don't like. I'm just sharing my opinion and what I think is worth it. So my choice for the lower end whiskey is, of course, Jim Beam. Now I did splurge a little bit and get Jim Beam Black, which was about $14.99 at my local grocery store. Honestly, I think it is very similar to regular Jim Beam, so you can kind of base my opinion on that. I just think it's a little bit better. Now some people may wonder why I don't go with like Evan Williams or Old Crow or Ancient Age or anything like that as my lower end bourbon. Obviously, you know the cheapest of cheap bourbon is not going to compare to the higher end bourbon, but all 3 of these I think are good, and we're going to see if the price difference is worth it between the 3. My choice for mid-range bourbon is a little bit different for me. It's not anything I featured before. It's, of course, Woodford Reserve. Now, I got this bottle for like $25, but it usually ranges between, $28 to $32, depending on where you're at. So I think it's a good mid-range bourbon to put into this comparison. And my choice for a higher-end bourbon, which still isn't really that expensive, it's still under $50, and that is Knob Creek Single Barrel. Now, I picked this one over, some of the $80 and $90 bourbons because 1, I'm cheap, and 2, it's my personal belief that you don't have to go that high to find a really good bourbon. Sorry if I'm disappointing people that I'm not trying Pappy or anything here, but I'm keeping it real. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour these just so they can get started, aerating or whatever. And like with my last whiskey reviews, I am using Tribeca glasses, which are my all-time favorite tasting glasses. They're basically like Glencairns, but slimmer and a lot easier to drink from. If you're interested in getting them, they're on Amazon. They're not that expensive. I put a link to my influencer page down below if you want to check them out and support my channel. And quick shout out to It's Bourbon Night. They're actually the ones who inspired me to buy them through their Amazon link. So I don't care. Use either of our links. They are awesome. Also worth noting, Jim Beam just uses a plastic cap versus a cork, unlike these other ones. Not a big deal, but the cork definitely helps with the aesthetic. All right, next up we have the Woodford. And lastly, our Knob Creek Single Barrel. So wow, I'm actually surprised how similar color all 3 of these are. The Knob Creek is definitely the darkest, which it is the strongest. It's 120 proof, so that may have something to do with it. It's aged longer. So I got all 3 whiskeys poured, and let's get started with the Jim Beam. If you know bourbon, you know Jim Beam. This is different from the regular Jim Beam because it is extra aged. Now that could mean whatever they want to mean. It basically just means it's left in the cask a little bit longer than the standard Jim Beam. So for like $2 or $3 more, definitely pick this up if you're trying to get into more advanced whiskeys, but if you just want something cheap, Jim Beam is a good choice. So right off the bat, the nose of this isn't very strong. I'm not getting much of the typical bourbon notes, the vanillas, the caramels. It does have a oaky note and almost like a banana or something kind of light fruit. It just feels very light and sweet, and that's kind of, typical Jim Beam. So let's give it a taste and see how it fares. It's good. It's very similar to the nose, but I'm getting a lot of the flavors that I thought I was missing on the nose. It does still have, the caramel vanilla taste you expect from a bourbon. It's very, very sweet though, which I've noticed with the higher end whiskeys, you don't get a lot of that sweetness, which I think is one reason it's really good in a cocktail. It complements other sweet fruit flavors well. There's nothing bad about it. It's just, as with most things, the lower the price you go, the more you're missing out. Or are you? Let's find out with whiskey number 2, which is Woodford Reserve. Now, as you can tell, my husband and I have been going through this bottle. This is actually his whiskey. This is his favorite go-to whiskey. And this is 45.2% alcohol, so 90.4 proof. So let's give it a smell. So side by side, it's a lot more similar than I expected. Normally with Woodford, I am overwhelmed by the oaky wood notes. I'm not necessarily getting it after just trying the Jim Beam. It's similar, but I'm definitely picking up on the caramels and other things other than oak compared to the Jim Beam. It doesn't smell as sweet as the Jim Beam, but there is some sweetness there. So let's taste it and see how it compares. It's good. It's really interesting. I'm just kind of like shocked because every time I've had Woodford, I've been overwhelmed with the oakiness, but having it side by side with another one, it's actually not that much more oaky than Jim Beam. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just it's something I've always associated with Woodford, so it's kind of like tripping me out that it doesn't taste like that. So yeah, I like it. Now, do I think it is worth the $10+ more compared to Jim Beam? That's debatable. If you're sipping it neat, I think it is a more enjoyable experience sipping neat compared to Jim Beam. But if you're someone who mixes your whiskey either with ginger ale or Coke or in a cocktail, Jim Beam is just fine. So that brings us to our third and final whiskey, the Knob Creek Single Barrel. Now this one is a little different because it is a barrel proof whiskey. It is single barrel reserve and it is 120 proof. Bourbon fact, Knob Creek is actually made at the same distillery as Jim Beam, which is part of the reason why I picked Jim Beam to start with. This bottle normally runs between $45 to $60 depending on your area, so it is a lot more pricey compared to the Jim Beam, which is part of the reason why I wanted to compare it side by side. Is there really that much of a difference? Now since this is 120 proof, I'm going to put a little bit of water just to proof it down to make it similar to the Woodford and the Jim Beam. Oh wow, right off the bat, the nose of this is incredibly delicious. I don't really have another way to put it. It's like a very buttery caramel, definitely not that light fruit note that I get in these. It's like a deeper, I guess like a plum note. It smells like a dessert. It smells like, you know, you walk into a candy shop and they have all the chocolate caramel out in front of you. That sounds like an exaggeration, but the smell of this is significantly better. If we're going by smell alone, this one, you know, totally wins. But of course we're not. We have to give it a taste. Wow, the finish is so long, the flavors are so multifaceted. It goes a step or two beyond what you're getting in Jim Beam and Woodford. It's still similar. I mean, I'm not saying that it's, you know, a completely different ballpark, but it's like a next level bourbon. So, final verdict. Is Knob Creek Single Barrel worth the price point of $45 to $60 when you compare it to Jim Beam or Jim Beam Black? I have to say, abso-freaking-lutely. If you're someone like me that really likes just sipping and enjoying the flavors of whiskey, you will really appreciate what goes into this 9-year-old whiskey. There's so many layers of flavors. It's complex. You get the oakiness, of course, but I love the oakiness. And I thought that the Woodford was going to actually outdo this in the oakiness, but not side by side. There's a significant difference. Even when I add a good bit of water to this is just incredible with the amount of flavor it gives you. So Knob Creek Single Barrel is my worth it winner when it comes to bourbon whiskey. Now, this may not be the case when you talk about other types of whiskey. That's why in the next episode, I'm going to be comparing 3 different rye whiskeys at 3 different price points and letting you know if it's the same case as with bourbon. So if you like this video, make sure to leave me a thumbs up and subscribe if you're interested in seeing the next few videos in this series. Check out my other whiskey reviews. They're up on a playlist on my channel. You see it at the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next video. Bye.